Hey guys, today we're going to talk about something we're really passionate about, investing, and specifically a flip situation. So one thing, my name is Matt Perry with the Perry Group. I'm here with Mallory and Devin. One thing that is really we're all really passionate about is wealth building and generational wealth. And 90% of millionaires actually build wealth through real estate. So we wanted to share a little bit about one of the ways you could do that. So today we're actually sitting in a flip situation that we bought, and we want to kind of walk through some of the details of what that looked like and give you a little more information. So Mallory, you want to explain kind of how we got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2019, I was presented with an opportunity from an agent outside of our area to meet with a client that was in need of relocating her elderly mother at the time. Her health wasn't doing very well, and really just taking care of this property was too much. So at that time I had come in, met with the whole family. We had discussed multiple different options as far as, putting it on the market or, going to a program like Open Door or OfferPad or like Keller Offers. And ultimately at that time, really all of the whole process combined was just too much for them to really kind of take on. So at that point, they put everything on hold and said, hey, I'll be in contact, once mom starts to unfortunately maybe decline a little bit more, just because there were some tax things and some financial advice being given from some other people in their world. And so kind of fast forward to about, June of this year?
Yep.
I'd been in contact with them. I actually visited mom at the hospital a couple times, and ultimately, unfortunately, Viola had passed away, and so her daughter, Catherine, reached out and said, hey, I know way back when you gave us all these options as far as what we could do, with mom's property. Right now, we really did not know how this was going to affect us, and it's just too much. Do you think you could help us out with, finding somebody who could just basically buy the property for cash, and we don't have to put it on the market, there's no showings, there's no cleaning, there's none of that. And I said, I'm sure, let me think in my database and whatnot. And I started thinking of people that I knew that were investors that I'd worked with in the past. And then sort of a light bulb went off. I've been to this house so many times, I kind of fallen in love with Viola. And so kind of called Matt and said, hey, I know this is a crazy idea, but what do you think about renovating this, 900 square foot house in Durham?
Yeah.
And so, sat down, came out here, had some conversations, spoke to Catherine, the daughter, about it, and I said, I think I have a solution to what you guys have going on. And she said, okay, well, tell me more. And I said, well, what if Matt and I buy it? And she started crying and said, there's nobody in the world I'd rather, buy this house than you guys. Like, you've been here, mom would love this. So it kind of was a, match made in heaven as far as that was concerned. From our angle, but obviously, like, I guess when you think about it, I had this advantage through the agent referral and, meeting the client and knowing about this opportunity really before it ever hit the market. So whether it's, for ourselves or for our other investor clients, it can kind of be a neat little niche.
Yeah, I think when you come to investing, finding the opportunities is really one of the keys. And so what we can do with our network, like this example, where it's either through the agents that we know across the country or through our clients and our base, our network can find opportunities not just for ourselves, but also for our investor clients. So that's really how we land on not only this one, but other properties that we've been able to help our other clients with. And oftentimes, like as Mallory just described, it's a real win for the seller, because while we can list the property and try to maximize top dollar, at times, sometimes there's other factors for the seller, and ease and simple and quick are more advantageous for them and more beneficial than just give me the most money. So I think this was an example.
And what I remember about the situation is when Mallory called, I know this was important to you personally to make this a smooth transition for Viola's family, but Matt is not in the personal relationship with the client, and he's the numbers guy. And so your call to Matt and then his discussion with me is, okay, what does this look like? Right. So we don't just say, oh, we love Viola, we need to buy this house. And we do sort of do that sometimes. But I think bigger picture, when we're going through that process, there is sort of a mental process that you go through and that you look through the different steps. And so tell me a little bit about if I'm looking to invest and I don't know the client and I don't care about their personal situation, I just want to know, is this a good investment for me? Am I going to make money? And how's that going to work? So what would be the normal process for that if I'm an outside client?
Yeah, good question. I think at first you're looking at what is your long-term goal, right? So some clients are looking at this as a buy and hold situation. So they're going to buy the property, rent it out, hold it for long term. There's a lot of benefits to that. Or you're looking at more of a flip situation. Either way, getting in on the buy side is really where the key is. You know, like they always say, you make your money on the buy side. So getting in at the right price is oftentimes the key. But then from that point, and now I can kind of get into a little more detail on this, we look at, okay, what would be the purchase price? In either example, is there any kind of rehab to do the property, fixing it up? That could be as simple as paint and carpet, and that could be more in depth like what we did here. And so what is the rehab cost? And then factoring that in, and obviously we have the resources to help do that. And then lastly, would be, okay, if I'm gonna flip it, what is the market value? What's the market looking like? What's the market going to look like in 3 months? You know, a lot of times that you have a window of 8 weeks, you're trying to get all this done and then get the house back on the market, because time is money in those situations. So there's a lot of those kind of factors playing into that, you know, to that equation as well. And then looking at the upside on the backside to see, okay, what kind of profit is there in there to make.
So yeah.
What would you add to
No,
that?
I was just gonna say. I mean, basically, we knew what the family needed to essentially net on the property, and so okay, take that number, and then from there brought a couple contractors in through here. We knew we had more or less a blank slate. You know, we knew there was gonna be, we needed to allocate some money towards certain things that, you know, maybe once we started the renovation or the demo, we weren't necessarily going to know. But we knew on the high end, we sort of, I think, more or less forecasted, okay, if it's worth X, we know we really should only spend Y. So if we knew, whatever, it's 350, then we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're just like spending to spend, right? Because then that quickly gets out of control. So we knew, okay, let's allocate this amount of money for the renovation, and then best case scenario, we get the top. Worst case scenario, we break even, and it's not a negative, you know, situation, or we decide to hold on to it. And so there's always multiple plans in place. Specifically, I know for this property, and I would always recommend for my clients as well, because you never know, you know, what's going to happen on any particular day.
So at what point in the process did you guys recognize, okay, we're going to use this investment as a flip, as a short-term rental, as a long-term rental, or are you still investigating that?
We've had that conversation probably.
For this
way too many
specific
times.
example, I think it's a little bit fluid. At times you're going to have clients, and we would be in a situation where it's definitely a flip. And so if we're talking about specifically flipping a home, which for ease is buying it, fixing it up, and then turning around and selling it immediately. You don't plan on holding on to the property for profit. So in that case, back to your question, it's what is the market value when it's all said and done? Take away the profit you want to make, and then take away the rehab cost, knowing that there's going to be a little wiggle there, because almost always something's going to come up that you weren't expecting in the rehab and in the fixing up, and then whatever's left is essentially what you should be paying for the property, right?
Did anything come up with this house that you weren't expecting during the process? So we had a budget and we brought the contractors in, and then was there something that we thought, that wasn't accounted for?
This house did not have central air condition, as we remember. So one of the major hurdles we had to overcome was, even though we had 6 or 7 HVAC contractors in here, ultimately once this area was redesigned and they went up into the attic and they saw the space they had in the crawl space, that became a little bit more expensive than what we had originally budgeted for. So there was a few things we opted, you know, not to allocate money towards, knowing that we obviously having a house in North Carolina with central air conditioning was going to be very, very important. So,
and those are questions that we can help with if we're working with one of our investor clients to help them foresee. Oftentimes we can help looking at things like the roof and go ahead and analyze where we are with that, looking at the exterior and the foundation. Obviously giving them really good estimates on what the interior upgrades are going to cost to come in and do. Some of the things, like to Mallory's point, that you can't always know is what's in the walls. So is there electrical challenges? Is there something in the crawl space or underneath the slab that could be a plumbing issue? So HVAC sometimes. So you would investigate all those things, but there's always going to be kind of once until you get into the project.
And did y'all just have that built into the budget where there was X amount of dollars that were sort of planned for emergencies, if you will, or?
Yeah,
I would say more. I
Unforeseen.
think we overshot the original budget,
Okay.
knowing that, okay, best case scenario, we come in less, and then we have a little bit of extra money for furnishings or whatever else. Or we're not going to be coming out of, just bleeding money to bleed money. And then also I learned a lot about having to be at the mercy of the building department. So, the electrical inspector, the plumbing inspector, the building inspector, the HVAC inspector, whether or not our contractor believed that those things were necessary or required, it didn't really matter because ultimately the building department and the electrical department has to sign off on it. So that was the part I think in hindsight I probably would have allocated a little bit more in the budget for. And it might be more specific to the fact that this is a 1945 house and, maybe in a newer build that wouldn't have been the case. But that was probably the biggest thing I think we undershot because electrical and things like that, we ended up
Each
spending
project
more.
is different, but like to Mallory's point, you have ones where if you're going to involve changing out HVAC systems and things like that, you have to get those inspectors involved, whereas smaller rehabs where you're just painting and maybe changing out flooring, there's not a need for inspectors from the city, so that can expedite the process. And so the other thing is if you're definitely going to flip, time is really every day counts. So you want to have things as lined up as you can, so when you close on the property, ideally you've got it completely turned around in 8 weeks and can get it sold and closed. So 12 weeks for turnaround would be an ideal 90 days, because obviously every day you own that property once you close, while you're doing the rehab, number one, you're not making income because you're not renting the property and you're not living in it, and number two, you've got taxes, you got utilities, etc. So it's costing you money by the day. So if you're definitely going to sell it, you would want to have a game plan and have it ready to market as soon as possible. And those are all things that we can kind of talk through and help if that's something you're exploring.
So if we have an investor client who isn't sure which type of investment they want to do, but they're interested just investing in real estate, besides using us as a resource, the Perry Group as a whole, what other resources are we providing them that will help through the process? For instance, the general contractor.
Mm-hmm.
We have names of people that we use, and in particular we use for this house, but who else is involved in this process that they might need TPG for?
So, part of, talking through the different analyses that we did on this property as far as, when we're looking at long term, we're looking at midterm, we're looking at short term, we're looking at flipping, I think that sort of encompassed a lot of the services that we can help provide was that, we ran the long-term numbers on this using a program that we have access to that will give us a ballpark as far as what a long-term rent range will look
and if
like.
they go that route, we have property management connections, lots of vendors, not just contractors, cleaners, landscapers, etc.
Okay.
That could go into that equation. And I think also backing up, the first thing we would do would be to sit down and just find out, what are your goals? This now we're veered into investing, so this is ultimately a wealth building strategy. So what is your wealth building goals long term, and then we back that down to, okay, what are we trying to do as your next step or first step, and then kind of attack it from there. And that's where everyone is different, and then each project will be different. So how this investor might have different things that he prefers or she prefers, the next one will be different, and their goals are different. So it really starts with a comprehensive consultation at the beginning, just to find out more about what are their goals and how can we help them accomplish that. And then once we know that, then we can dive into, how to explore opportunities to move forward.
Okay, and I would think as a seasoned investor who wanted to use us, they sort of know I have X amount of dollars to spend, this is what I'm looking for, help me find it. But if I have never done this before, and I'm saying, I think I would like to invest in real estate, but I don't know if I have the cash that I would need to put down, I don't really know how the process works at all. What's the first thing you would discuss? Is it how much money you have to put down? Is it what your long-term goals, I guess, and short-term goals? How do people know where to begin?
I think it is a series of questions and figuring out where they fall on a scale of, risk averse, or are they a little bit more, risk tolerant, to figure out, based on how they answer that question. I think that helps give us a direction in terms of, okay, which type of investment properties. Maybe we're looking at more of the new construction, or the, has a history of, already having a tenant in place or is already tenant occupied. So then it's really just a matter of them understanding, okay, based on the price point, based on, the rent that it's bringing in, what, whether you're going to be cash flowing, whether you're going to be breaking even, whether you're going to be maybe taking a loss for a short period of time. And even as crazy as that sounds, to pay $100 a month, well, you've obtain an asset, right? So, and over time, as rents increase, which historically over the last, I believe since they've been tracking it, rents at some level and some degree have increased. And then from there, I think it's exposing those who are a little unsure of what else their options are. And so if they're kind of more in the middle, then maybe it's, the midterm, or it is something with a short-term option.
So you just help people peel back.
Yeah, I think it's just a serious,
what works best for them.
and like how much time they have to give, and how involved or uninvolved they want to be, right? Some people want to set it and forget it, and then some people want to be the ones that are sweeping the floors and cleaning the windows.
You were this morning.
Yes, and doing all that kind of stuff, like putting in the hard work. And there's not a right or wrong, right? Both of those are great investment properties. I think it just depends on, is this something you're using as a, retirement wealth building or is this going to be something you want to have roped into your day to day? And I think the fun and interesting, cool part about this area is you've got all of those options. So I think that's really, with my investor clients at least, kind of what we've walked through, with them. And I think part of what we used this opportunity for was, we had all done long term. So we've all bought a house, threw a tenant in there for 12 months, collected rents. It's pretty easy in, the grand scheme of things. And I think part of the conversations that we were having around this one was, well, why don't we be the guinea pigs? If we're going to truly talk about this at a high level to and with our clients and our investors, I think we kind of have to, have done it. And so that was, I think, the most fun about this whole thing was those conversations around, like, yeah, we could easily do this. We could put a tenant in here, we could rent it out for 12 months, but, we've never done the other options, so.
One thing I've realized through this process is, and I don't think you start off this way, but you have to be sort of clear in your goal, your long-term goal, because Matt's long-term goals and mine tend to be different for this project in particular. Mine was, this is going to be super fun to pick out the paint and the flooring and the furniture and, make it look pretty.
Right.
And Matt's was, okay, let's slow down and, we don't need to just go spend just to make it look pretty. We need to figure out how much we had to spend, what the long-term goal is, and what the long-term play is. Are we going to furnish it, or are we going to leave it unfurnished and it may not look as pretty, but it'll sell quickly?
Right.
So how did you guys determine, for this one at least in the short term, that we would go ahead and furnish it, that we're going to use it as a short-term rental and maybe turn it into midterm or long-term rental, but for right now it's being used as a short-term rental, right?
Correct.
So how did you get to that place?
Yeah, I think a lot of the consultation that Mallory alluded to is around what are your goals and how much risk do you want to have and how much do you want to be involved. So, for example, buying and holding a long-term rental, which is a traditional, like a 12-month lease or longer, is a much more, like she said, set it and forget it. So that property is you're gonna buy it, you're gonna get a tenant in there, and we have all the tools to help with that whole process and advise on it. But at that point, you're just kind of dealing with it, and then you can take a step further back and not even deal with the day-to-day and have a property manager actually manage collecting rent, any maintenance issues, etc. So you can go as hands-off as a long-term rental with a property management company, which a lot of people enjoy and like to do. Or you can property manage yourself in that situation, and then there's other situations like short-term rentals where people are looking at like a 3-month rental, and then we talked about the flip. In this case, we decided that it would be worth the location, made sense to consider an Airbnb, and so that's kind of what we.
What about this location made this one make sense for an Airbnb?
I mean,
proximity to Durham or downtown Durham, proximity
Hospital.
to hospitals, airport, Research Triangle Park. I think at some point it was just like ripping off the Band-Aid, right? Where we could have talked about it until we were blue in the face, and then ultimately it's like, okay, we have a backup plan. So we knew worst case scenario, if it failed as an Airbnb or failed as a midterm or whatnot, we made the decision based on the worst case scenario. So we made it saying, okay, if we have to long-term rent it, we're good with that, we're okay with that, we know the numbers on that, but let's try to, take a chance
That was
and
the plan
see,
B.
right, like, and see what this really looks like. And even having it be, like I said, a learning experience, an opportunity for our clients, for visiting, guests that come to the area that are looking for properties. So for me, I liked that it kind of exposed us to a lot of different real estate related areas. And if it, like I said, if it didn't work and it didn't fail, then we chalk it up as we've got a lot of furniture that we got to put somewhere else. But I think because we were very budget conscious about how much we were spending on the furniture, I think also too that we knew if we're going to take a loss, we weren't just spending to spend. So
yeah, Airbnbs require a lot more hands-on, a lot more day-to-day. With you're furnishing it, there's a lot of additional things you're adding to it for features. There's cleanings to coordinate, just a lot more hands-on. Now the upside is potential. There's more return, in the course of a month. So usually that's how it works, right? The higher the return, the more noise, so to speak. Whereas the long-term rental tends to be a lower return, but much more, less day-to-day noise. So I think a lot of it goes back to that conversation of each investor. Now some will have a little bit of both, but a lot of times investors will fall into one of those categories where they kind of prefer to stick with, like, they just like Airbnbs and they'll do multiple, and they have some that just prefer the long-term.
Yeah.
Long-term
So
investing.
do you think there is something to be said for if you're going to do Airbnbs, you're going to do multiple? I mean, does it make sense to do one, or does it make more sense if that's your niche to do 5 or 10 or 20?
I would say regardless, either strategy, it always gets easier as you scale it. So it's easier to run. It's not 5 times the work to run 5 long-term rentals as it is to run 1. And I would say the same thing about Airbnb. Like running 5 Airbnbs or 10 is not 10 times the work of running 1. Because once you have the cleaner, then you can just kind of duplicate and economies of scale work for you.
Well, and I found like even just learning from other people's mistakes, and so kind of using the my past experience with a different Airbnb, and then just listening to podcasts and watching and listening to as much as I could. I think that really helped set this one up for success as well, because it wasn't just like, well, we don't really know what we're doing, we're just gonna put some furniture in it and hope and pray that it all works. So there definitely is strategy and planning and whatnot with it, but I don't necessarily think it matters if it's 1 or 5. I would say it's probably easier to have a cleaning person on retainer if they're going to 5 properties versus 1 properties, but I think we have enough resources to help make those connections. So it's almost like, because we have 1, then it's almost an extension of ours to then have this cleaner say, hey, we have 4 or 5 other clients that have Airbnbs, would you be willing to take theirs on as well? So kind of piggyback off each other, even if we don't all own them at the same.
When did you buy your first investment property?
2014. So
And what kind of investment was that?
that was a long-term rental investment. Yep.
And did you buy new, or was it?
It was an existing townhome. So, and that's where time plays into your favor. Time, that home has tripled in value in that time. Now that's not something you can guarantee over a 10-year period, but
so 10 years. Okay.
but over 10 years it tripled in value. I think we get into a lot of details around the tax ramifications, but if you think about that for just a second, let's just pretend that was a $200,000 increase. If any of us go out and make $200,000, we've got to pay the government a big chunk of that, right, in taxes. So they hurt you the most on earned income, but that is passive income. So I didn't have to go out and work for that money, and in addition, I don't have to pay taxes on it, and I can access it in a lot of different ways. I can go do a cash out refinance and get a new loan on that property with
have you done that
pulling out more.
property?
Actually, on that one I have. So in that situation, actually, I pulled out the down payment I put in the home plus some money. So now I technically don't have any money invested in the home, and I've been able to pull out money, which has helped me to do other investments. But the key to that is when I pulled that money out, I didn't pay any taxes on it. So I put that money in my account without having to turn around and pay 30, 35, 40% to federal government, state government. So there's a lot of aspects there. We can talk about when clients go to trade a property or sell, they don't have to necessarily pay taxes on that. So investment properties, there's a 1031 exchange where that allows you to sell that property, buy a new investment property, and not pay taxes on the gains. So there's ways to avoid that, which are of course legal, but will really are very advantageous versus just going out and it's not saying it's wrong to make a lot of money, but that is the most taxed money you're going to have is earned income.
And what about you, Mallory? Have you bought an investment property?
Yes, so I bought my first investment property in 2020.
Okay, so not too far behind.
Mm-mm.
And how's that one doing as far as
Great. It's in Holly Springs. It's a single family.
single family?
Mm-hmm.
And is that the only one you have now currently?
That
Well,
one and
this
this one, yeah.
This one. Okay.
I'm a
and
partial owner and I house in Bluffton, South Carolina, but it's not mine yet. So, but I think to what you just said too, part of why we opted to not flip this one had a lot to do with taxes.
Right.
So when we were talking about our gain after our fix, I think probably, I'm assuming a lot of people underestimate, okay, how much of that then is also going to have to go to the government. So we knew we had, you know, two options, and we hold on to it for 2 years, then we could 1031 exchange any of the profit into something different, or we can, you know, we can continue obviously renting it and doing something different with it. But I think we probably underestimated that excuse me, that number initially in the renovation cost, or the, you know, the profit we would be making on the flip side, or not underestimated, but maybe didn't, you know, you don't, it's not the first thing you think about. You're like, oh, I put 100,000 in, it's worth 100,000, you know, I'm gonna make $100,000 or whatnot. So
Okay, yeah, so take me back to that, because I remember the conversation about, we could, you know, can we talk about what you spent on this property? What was the initial?
So we spent $166,000 on this house.
Okay, so bought it for $166,000, and then how much did it cost to do the renovations all in?
66,000, 67,000.
Okay.
And that was a brand new HVAC. So keep that in mind. This whole thing needed a whole new. I say that because that was a big bulk of the chunk of the money.
Okay. And not furnishing. That was just
Correct.
Getting the house ready for if we wanted to sell it.
Correct.
As is. Okay. So that was what, 215-ish all in.
240, 250.
Oh. Okay. And that's why I'm not the math person. Okay. So 240, 250. Let's say you're 250. So then, when you talked about just selling it, what do you think this home would have sold for had you just put it on the market right then?
At that time,
That was the hardest part to determine.
300. So if it's say it's 300 and just net it out to 50,000, that's a good chunk of change. However, if the government's going to take 35% of that in taxes, then now that number quickly, you know, boils down to more like 33,000, 32,000.
Okay,
So
but even if that's your goal, I mean, in 6 months, was it 6 months-ish from purchase to when the
it would have
project was
been
complete?
ideally
4
4 months. 6 months would have just cut into that number because, like I said, you're carrying the cost of the home throughout those additional months.
We
So-
closed in August.
So,
and then it was done.
so if your
basically.
goal was flipping a 30K plus, you know, net profit would be a successful flip.
So
you know?
yeah, so after taxes-ish, you
Right.
would have netted around $30,000.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not, I mean, it wouldn't have been the worst idea for a lot
Correct.
of
Not at
people.
all.
That sounds pretty appealing.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So that's one option that you can rinse and duplicate, and obviously the next property now you have 30,000 if you're just going to roll it in your next investment to put toward whatever you're purchasing. So now you have less money in that investment than you initially did, right? So you can get to where your investments add up to
Sure.
the fourth house might be totally purchased on investment profit, right? In this case, because of the taxes and whatnot, we decided to.
We knew time was on
go
our
on to-
side, just like the example you gave about the one you bought in 2014 and it
Right.
tripling in value. I think the ultimate decision was, okay, worst case scenario, it doesn't get ever any more than 300,000 and we've made a profit over those 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it ends up being. Best case scenario, the area that we're in continues to blossom and bloom, and now all of a sudden you have a $500,000 asset.
Right.
So we again made the decision off of the worst case scenario, and even if it went below the 300,000, the odds of it going below what we had into
Invested.
it was really where you're making the ultimate decision, right?
So at what point would you not have to pay taxes on it if you decided to sell this one?
Well, in a primary
Capital
residence,
gains, I guess.
yeah, in primary residence you can avoid capital gains up to certain amounts, whether you're filing married or independently. But on a investment property, you will pay gains unless you 1031 the property. So
After 2
there's-
years.
After 2 years. So in that case, you would need to 1031 to avoid, you know, taxes.
So after 2 years, you could sell this property and
August 2025.
you would or would not have to roll that money into a new property in order to not pay taxes.
We would.
You would have to do a 1031 exchange, which is rolling it into another like and kind property in order to, in order to avoid taxes.
Okay.
So, but I think if you take a step back to finish up the tax conversation, obviously all these topics can go really, really deep. I think
Sure.
that in essence, how I look at it is you should definitely have a diverse portfolio. So real estate won't necessarily be all of your portfolio, but if you look at a stock, if I own a stock and it goes up double, great, but the only way to take that money out is to sell it, right? So if I sell it, I make the money, but then I might also pay on the dividends, taxes on the dividends. If I own a piece of property and it doubles, number one, I don't pay taxes on that money. I can access that money without having to get rid of the asset, right? Because I can refinance the property. But the other key to that is if this stock was $200,000 and this house was $200,000, I had to pay the whole $200,000 to buy the stock. The house I can pay 20% of and have somebody else pay 80%. So now I own the asset, I can access the cash, but you paid 80% and I paid 20%. That's really, I think, where the huge value and difference is in real estate and investing in real estate. So I would rather put in 20 cents and you put in the other 80, and then over time I own the asset that we're both paying off. And obviously, if you look at historical rates of appreciation, 4.5% to 5% a year for real estate in our market here in the Triangle in Raleigh, North Carolina, Durham, those numbers can be higher. And so if I'm looking at that appreciation where the property and the value is growing and then somebody else is paying down on whatever's owed on the mortgage, then you see how that gap that widens is your equity. And that's what we're trying to build, and that's how you build wealth. And that equity is being built not by an active job, right? It's passive income, and it's also being built, like I said, where you can avoid having to pay tremendous amounts of taxes on it.
So with how many investment properties do you own at this time, long-term rental?
10.
And so what do you think's been the biggest headache for those? I don't feel like you've had a lot you've had to deal with as far as
No, I mean there's
issues.
just normal like things that come up with a house, and you have an occasional issues with a tenant and whatnot. But in the grand scheme of things, I think and we can help with all these things. If you're filtering on the front end, making sure you're doing the right things to get people in, it can be just very successful. And like I said, if you want to be completely hands off, there's some great property management opportunities that we can help you leverage that too. So you really just are collecting checks at that point. You're not having to deal with any of the day-to-day. Other people would prefer to not have that be one more line item, because obviously that cuts into their profit. Mm-hmm. And so they just self-manage their properties, especially if they have maybe 5 or less. And I think that's a very good strategy as well. So, and there's also technology that we have that can help with to streamline that process, so that you don't feel like you're always. I think sometimes people feel like they're going to get like a call every other night at 11 p.m. that they have a plumbing leak, and those 10 properties, I probably get 1 to 2 calls a month. So it's just not a very noisy investment.
Well, we've learned, I think, so much too along the way from not only our own, but from other people who own hundreds, right? So little tips and tricks that, maybe you never thought of how big of a relief it would be or how much easier it would make things. Just small little things.
And again, this shouldn't be your only investment, but to go back to kind of my wide advice, if you find anybody that has built substantial wealth, they might have had a job, like the top people we think about, like the top surgeon, the top this or that in their field. They have a really high income earning job, but their wealth is not built on that job. They just use that income to turn around and invest and fund their investments. And like I said, 90% of the people that have done that and have become a millionaire or beyond are doing it through real estate. And I would venture to say, unless you've owned a company that turned into Amazon, if you're in the billionaire status, you almost definitely have part of your portfolio that involves a heavy chunk of real estate. Yeah. So it is a very tried and true method and something that everybody should be considering. And so it starts with home ownership, starts with putting a plan together to get yourself into a home, so you're building your wealth through your own primary residence, versus building somebody else's wealth by paying rent. And then once you've gotten to that point, if you choose to step into the next realm, which is what we're talking about today, then we can be a big asset for that.
So if I want to invest in real estate, and I'm going to start by calling you, do I need to be a local resident? Does it help if I live in Durham, if I want to invest in Durham, or can I live in Albuquerque and call you and say I'd like to invest in the Raleigh-Durham?
I mean, a lot of it's just a math equation, right?
Yeah.
So it's obviously trust, rapport, experience on our end, making sure it's a good match between between the both of us in your example, and then really from there, it's just presenting the information to you from out of state, and obviously having all the resources available to be able to help you through that process to make an educated decision. And I think too, there's a certain level of calculated risk, right, when you're making this decision. So I think that also has to be understood and known that, you know, we're experts and we've done this a bunch of times and we own personal ones and whatnot, but at the end of the day, like, you know, we don't have a crystal ball to predict every possible, you know, thing that could happen. So, but we're here to help solve the problems if the problems come up, and at least, you know, give you the, like I said, the resources, and the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. I think that's one thing that we're both really good at, is not just, you know, hitting only on the high points, but making sure that any decision that we're educating somebody on is based off of the worst and then the best. And then if it's somewhere in the middle, or if it's, you know.
So do more of your clients live locally for investment purposes only? I know we have tons of families here, but if someone's looking to invest, people that have worked with you, is it sort of just they're all over the place, or are they more local?
I would say lately, probably the last 12 to 18 months, it seems to be more out of area. And wanting to capture, kind of tripling your your value of your property before it's too late, right? I think some people have already missed the boat in some areas, but there's still plenty of people who want to try to take advantage. And so I would say it's probably 70-30, 70% out of area, 30% in area.
How have interest rates going up some affected the investment market? Are they affecting it?
Yeah, to finish the previous question, I think that this area, North Carolina, is the third most moved into state, so buyers are moving into it. So I think that brings outside attention. So there are definitely tons of investors that we've spoken to and are currently working with out of the area, as well as local residents that want to invest and see the value of investing here locally.
Okay.
So it's definitely a mix, as Mallory said. Rates absolutely factor into that equation, just on the buy side and on the investing side. So we obviously had some historically low rates, you know, from around the pandemic, 2019 to 2023. Those moved up drastically, as we all know. They're still operating in a very, at this point, in a very normal average range. You know, we're right now in the sixes. The average over a 50-year period is actually 7.97 is the average mortgage rate. So, and even over the last 30 years, it's right at 6%. So even with those historic years we've had over the last 5 and 10 years with rates, we're still hovering right around average for interest rates. But as they move down, certainly the pro and con of that is obviously the numbers look better for an investor and for a buyer, primary resident buyer. The downside is obviously the more people that flood into the market on the buy side creates a lot more demand. So then finding that property at the right number is oftentimes more of a challenge. So a lot of investors have those two things to factor in when they're looking at timing.
So tell me a little bit about, because we just bought the home in Wendell as an investment property, closed on that one, and then this one, both in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So 2023 had really high interest rates, at least historically speaking, relatively speaking for this area. Why did we invest at that time if the interest rates were so high?
So like that would be an example where during fourth quarter, things tend to be slower, and at that time rates had really shot up from early in the year, so demand was down. So then you're looking at a much more advantageous time to be a buyer because there's less demand, so the sellers have less options.
It's the Warren Buffett quote: when everybody else is running away, he was running towards, because that's where there's some true opportunity. And I think to answer the question about the investor, I found at least the true investors are people who were really in it for the long haul and really understood what they were, like, generational wealth building. Yes, interest rates were a kind of a data point that they had to factor into the whole decision, but I had numerous investors last year pay money each month for their investment properties because they knew it was a short-term problem and that an opportunity to possibly refinance was going to come, or the possibility to increase the rent was going to come. So it could eventually, or whatnot, be a combination of both. But those people were so adamant about that 80-20 principle, where they were still only putting down their 20%, and then someone else was paying 80. And in these situations, even if they were contributing $100 or $200 a month, in the long haul, they knew that was going to flip-flop, and they still had only invested their 20%. And even if they calculated their $1,200 a year that they were putting into it, it was still a win in the long run.
Sure.
So I thought when
Smart.
some people's eyes just lit up about that kind of stuff and they realized and like kind of painted the whole picture, I just think that's so cool.
I think it goes back to, if you're an investor, whether it's real estate or any other, form, stock market, you're always in the market for the right deal. So in that case, the rate factors in, but the rate is not. So if that's a good deal, then I'm going to move on it, because long term that's going to pay off. And what is locked in at that point? The price is locked in. So what I bought it for is locked in. I know that historically it's going to go up. And like to Mallory's point, I know 80% of the cost of that home will be paid over time by the tenant. And secondly, what's not locked in is the rate. So was the rate higher than I would have liked at that time? Absolutely. However, can that change down the road? Absolutely. So I could refinance that when the rates get to 5, or if they got back in the 4s, I could always refinance that at that time when it made sense.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but even at the high interest rates, the rent is still covering the full payment.
Absolutely.
You're not losing money on.
There's still what we call cash flow. So
Yes.
after all the expenses are paid, what's left is your cash flow, and that's what some investors focus on. And so there's definitely still cash flow even with the higher rate.
Yeah.
So works out well.
Yeah, smart on both sides.
Mhm.
What have we not
Because
covered?
these are not replacing our day-to-day jobs, right? So we're not living off of the cash flow. My goal is to live off of the cash flow in 20 years from now, once it's paid off, and going back to the 80-20. So
All right, so that was a very broad conversation, but really getting back to this particular house, this particular investment. Let's go back to, all right, we've decided that at least for now, this is going to be a short-term rental.
Yep.
And we're doing that for how long? 6 months? A year?
yeah, so we decided for 6 months to be fair to the property and to the numbers, right? We couldn't give it up too soon because, really, especially with short-term rentals, there's, high seasons and low seasons and whatnot.
You don't just put it on the market and it's rented for the first 30 days.
Exactly. So we said, okay, let's put it on the midterm rental.
And what does that mean exactly?
So we put it on, midterm is more than 90 days. More than 90 days, you do not have to collect tax, more than 30 days, you do not have to collect tax. So that's why we ended up going the platform of like Airbnb, because it easily collects the
Right.
taxes and whatnot for us.
Midterm is more like, there's like popular traveling nurses and people that are coming in for like, I'm coming in to shut this business down, so I'm gonna be here for 4 months, and then I just need a place to stay. They don't want to stay in a hotel for 4 months. So the midterm is those kind of clientele.
Okay, and short term is.
And generally speaking, like I said, you go from long term, which is more of a 12 or 12-month lease or longer, lower noise is what I call it, but usually lower return. Midterm then is kind of the middle bear, right? It's a little bit more noise, a little bit more turnover, and yet still a little bit more upside profit wise over that time period. And then you get to short term, which is Airbnb or VRBO, etc.
True, less than 30 days.
Less than 30 days, as much as one night or a week at a time. And then like Mallory hit on, while we were looking at 6 months, obviously you have some really extreme cases of this, like at the coast where, a property might make all of its money between, May and September if it's a oceanfront condo. And then that's a much harder to rent and make money on in November, December. In this case, this is more of a, not that case. So we think there won't be the extremes and the highs in the summertime for Airbnb like this property. However, there will still be some fluctuations throughout the year. So we want to kind of like, for this example, just see how it performs, and then that can dictate either we keep it as a short-term rental, and also do we need to try to look at other opportunities around this property to do it again? Because if it's working, then why not, just replicate it?
Well, and figuring out, okay, so long term, what would you net or what would you make in a 6 month period? Because the noise has got to be worth it to some point, right? Otherwise, why would you not just go the short or the long term route? So
Right.
we're kind of midway into that whole process in terms of, we listed it beginning of December. We had December almost fully booked. We have January almost fully booked. We have someone coming in here at 3 o'clock.
Better hurry.
So I think so far, it takes a little bit of traction. There's algorithms and things like that, and it's kind of feeling it out, figuring it out. What's the type of people? What are they doing when they come here? What kind of needs and wants and things like that they have? So I think those first 2 or 3 months have been a little bit of trial and error. And then from there, I'm hopeful that the second the next 3 months will be, okay, truly getting a grasp on, whether or not this was worth it, or is this something that, maybe we'd be better off just doing on long term. But I feel like we couldn't have made that call unless we did it, because we could look at numbers, what hotels charge, what other Airbnbs are charging in the area. I mean, we could have, gone crazy on spreadsheets, but until we just put it out there and let the public basically give feedback on demand and on pricing and on features and whatnot, we really were just looking off of artificial numbers. So I think that's been helpful and will hopefully be informative in the long run.
So, and you and I have had a lot of fun with just the process of this one,
Yes.
because this is the only one we've ever furnished, decorated. So choosing, I would say, if you're doing a big renovation, whether it's a flip or, any kind of renovations to the house, you don't usually buy a house that's perfectly ready for you to just turn over and start renting, right? Short term or long term. But this particular one, and I believe we have some before pictures that we can get to, but this one needed a lot of work. It had been lived in by a woman who wasn't capable of, keeping it up for a while at the end. And so we had a lot of work. And so one of the things I learned through this process is that you and I both love to decorate. We both love choosing paint colors, choosing the hardwood stain and everything. But loving it and having the time to do it are two different things. And so how many different exterior color combinations did we look at for this house?
Yeah.
So, is it going to be beige with yellow? And is it going to be bright yellow or pastel yellow? And so a lot of what I learned through this was, even if you enjoy those kind of things, it's not necessarily, if you're an investor, it's not just supposed to be a fun project, it's supposed to be lucrative and earn it. So that's when we brought Allison King into play. And so Allison King is a local designer, interior designer, and runs several businesses as well. I don't want to insinuate that's all that she does, but she has, for our clients, set up some design boards, some interior selections choices, so that in the future, instead of us debating over it, whether it's beige or off-white or ivory, we can say, hey, here's the link. We have your exterior color selected, your interior color selected, your hardwood stain, your light fixtures, plumbing fixtures, tile, everything, right? And so Allison has made those, we have, I don't know how many different, maybe 5 different selections that we can have our investors, if they're working with the Perry Group, come in and say, I don't have to decide between these 17,000 tiles. I can choose package A, and I have the link directly to all those things. And I think that's going to be huge for people who A, either don't enjoy it, or B, just don't really have the time to go to all the tile shops and all, the paint stores.
Well, it's like directly tied to profit, because I feel like as a consumer or as somebody who, would look at a rental property or have looked at a rental property or looked at Airbnbs or Verbos. I go to the places that look like how I would decorate them or how I want them to be decorated, or look like they're on trend with whatever year that it is, and they're not just dated and they have a bunch of random stuff just kind of all thrown together, or it looks like they bought everything on sale at Lowe's or whatnot. So I think that's huge.
I think what you're hitting on is, when you come to us, if you decide that you're going to get into investing in any of the formats that we've talked about, a lot of times people initially just think they're coming to us to help find the property, and that is definitely something that we can do. And like we started this conversation, we have a lot of off-market opportunities, so it's not just what you're seeing online, on Zillow, etc. However, like what we've just hit on is, there's so many facets about this, and there's so many different either professional opinions that you need to help guide you, or there's other professionals outside of the real estate world that we already have the resources, we've already vetted to have the best of the best to help with that. And so I think that's what we're bringing to the table when we partner with you. So
I can't wait to show off any selections that Allison chose for us. And then
then we went even as far as utilizing this as an opportunity to keep checklists of, what do you need to have in an Airbnb? What are some things that give you the luxury classification versus the non-luxury classification? Links to our Amazon pages, to our Target pages, So again, just to, because I think some of that stuff is probably, I mean, even having done it ourselves, was a little nerve wracking.
Sure.
Like, oh my goodness, I gotta not only buy paper towels for my own house, but I gotta buy all this stuff for some other house too. So to just have that easy button and know, like, okay, it's gonna get up and running and started if I go, and know what the budget's gonna be, right? I mean, we can
Yeah.
clearly and obviously share with somebody, if you're gonna buy something within this range, in this price point, and, you know, be this
And to furnish
size,
it.
right? Here is what roughly, you know, you would spend on that stuff. Because I think you could go crazy, like you said, picking it all out. But ultimately, you know, why make it harder on yourself than it needs to be?
Most investors we talk to, it boils down to, I want to obviously maximize profit. This is why I'm doing it, why I'm an investor, and I want to do it with the most ease. So like the least amount of time and the least headaches, right? And so we are just here to make it as easy as possible, knowing that there will be speed bumps and things coming up, and to try to help them maximize profit. And it's as simple as that if you boil it down.